So we have a very special show today. And this is a show I promised you that I would do because I interviewed this gentleman a couple of weeks ago, and his upbringing within the Church of Scientology's farm system where they used to send little kids. As I say, it's a horror story. That's a euphemistic way of saying it. It's beyond what you think somebody should have to go through at any stage in their life, much less when you're a child, when you can't fend for yourself, when you can't punch somebody out if they start treating you like dirt and abuse you. And this is going to be the happy ending. And I'll tell you, you're going to enjoy this because it's a real success story. But before I get into that, let me acknowledge my new Patreons, or the Patreons who upped their amount. So let me give you, all of you, an acknowledgement to begin with, all right? So now we have Matthew Arnold, and that's for $5. Thank you very much, Matthew. Very much appreciate it. Alice Lynch, $2. And that's my honorary granddaughter, if you remember. I'm sure you do, Alice. Anyway, she's a Patreon for $2. Thank you very much. And then Buffy raised her Patreon from $2 to $5. And nice upgrade. And thank you very much, Buffy. And then we have Maxwell Acree. And I don't know if I'm murdering your last name, but forgive me if I am. It looks like I should say Acree. Maxwell Acree for $4. And thank you very much, Michael. Then we have Chris Davidson for $2. Thank you very much, Chris. Justin Alexander, and that was for $5. Thank you very much, Justin. Eve Stevewood for $5. And thank you very much, Eve. And then Michael Feldman for $2. Thank you very much. Now, if you're new to this program and don't know what that's about, it's a program that we have that you can contribute to the ongoing success of this program. And no matter what happens, I'm going to do it anyway. I feel it's my duty to expose the things that the church has been up to and abusing people. But this is a way you can contribute to help this show continue to go on. Just go to the website, therealrunmiscavige.com, and you'll see the Patreon there. And you can turn yourself from a spectator into a participant simply by contributing something to this. Okay. So that's the acknowledgments. This is for the Patreons who either join newly or up their patron membership. Now let's get into the story. And this is a story. I got to get a different clipboard, man. You got to be Charles Atlas to get this goddamn thing to open. All right. This is a story about a guy who was raised as a kid under the auspices of the Church of Scientology, where they had a ranch or a farm where they would send children to be raised by other than their parent. And if you want to review this, I think I did this 2 weeks ago. The guy's name is Nathan Rich. And you don't have to do it now. Just listen to this and you can go back and listen to the first part of it. This is a guy that after his upbringing ended up on the street, living on the street for about, I think, 7 years, was a drug addict, meth, cocaine, heroin, you name it. He did it. And one day he's living in a tunnel and somebody mentioned to him, why don't you try computers, or words to that effect? He'll tell you when he gets on. Now, he had no money, no social security card, nothing. Let's see how this plays out. So, Nate, it's over to you, buddy.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, so thanks for the intro. So you're right. I was living in a tunnel. It was a tunnel under the streets of Albuquerque. And I was at this, I went to this party that some other punk friends had, and I was complaining. And I think I mentioned this on the last interview, but basically, like you said, somebody had mentioned to me, hey, why don't you try doing computers? And I just said, yeah, okay, sure, computers. And so then I had that real problem of how do I actually do that? What does that even mean? I don't know, but whatever it means, I need to figure out how to do it, how to do computers. And I had, like you said, nothing. I had no money, no job, no skills. I had at best an 8th grade education, no work history, no family. My friends were all punk rockers with no money. And, no birth certificate, no social security card. I didn't even know my social security number. And so, I had the clothes that I was wearing, which were punk clothes with patches and, rips and studs and spikes, and they were dirty and everything like that. And a huge spray painted mohawk. And, how do you do anything? I had slut tattooed on my fingers, for God's sakes. So that began an interesting period of time in my life where I let that question sit in my mind of, how do I do something? And I started to think about, like, how do I get money? Because I know that you need money to pay rent for things, pay for things like rent, pay for things like food, but most importantly, better clothing. Because I could get food from panhandling, and I could theoretically get a piece of clothes here and there, but I had nowhere to put them. So they were just going to turn back into, sewer clothes soon enough. So I had to figure out, how do I get money for rent? So I started to think about that, and then I ended up getting a girlfriend. So I wanted just a punk rock chick that I met with a huge mohawk and tattoos and everything. I met her, and we ended up hooking up and becoming boyfriend and girlfriend. She had an apartment, and so I sometimes could stay there. It was a new relationship, so not very often, but tried to stay there as much as I could. And she empathized with my plight and kind of realized that, hey, he wants to do something, so maybe I can help him out. Now, she didn't have much money either. She was working at a bar, and so I got hooked up with this, what's called a drop-in center, which is when you're homeless, there's a few different types of resources you can go to. And one of them is called the drop-in center, where they'll try to give you some fresh needles or, maybe some food or whatever they have laying around to sort of help you. And I went to this one called Youth in Transition, and the lady named Donna Rowe, who ran the place, she empathized with my, cause as well. And she offered to order my birth certificate for me from California, which cost her like $20. But she was very like, are you sure you want to do it? Because she didn't want to get burned for the $20. So I wondered how many people had burned her before. And I was sure. I was like, please, help me. And she said she couldn't help me with the Social Security card, so I had to do that myself. So I went down to the Social Security Administration while she ordered my birth certificate, which was really nice of her. So at the Social Security office, I tried to explain my situation to them, and they had no idea how to help me, because they're like, they had never seen a guy just walk in and say, I'm this person and I don't know my Social Security number and no one can vouch for me. Please give me a card. So wow. There's a lot of back and forth. I went there 2 or 3 times and tried all these different ideas, like, what can I do? And basically it ended up where I got very desperate, and I just kind of said, okay, what if I just get a note from somebody that just says that I am, this person and this number? They told me the number. So because they had said maybe a social, like a government person or a social worker that can vouch that you say that you're that person and whatever. So I ended up weirdly staying at a homeless shelter and then asking some guy that worked there to please write down on a piece of paper that I said that my name was Nathan Rich and that my Social Security number was this, which is absolutely, in retrospect, means literally nothing. And I took that paper to them, and the lady actually accepted it. And I was like, oh, thank you. Like, I knew it was going to be very hard to get it. And when she did that, I was so overwhelmed.
So wait a minute. They gave you your Social Security number first, and then you had to vouch that you were the person?
Yeah. So the lady told me my Social Security number, which I don't think she was necessary to do. I'm not sure. But otherwise it's like, what was I supposed to do? Because I had gone there again and again, like, look, lady, I need to get a job, please. She knew I was homeless because
Yeah.
I smelled, you know what I mean? I was obviously homeless, and she really fell for me. She was a really nice lady, and she really wanted to help me, and even her coworkers wanted to help. They kept like having these little group meetings trying to figure out what to do. And
Wow.
so they basically they said, well, we think that this is your social security number based on the information you told us, because I told them about my mother and all kinds of other stuff. And they said, but we still need proof that it's you.
So they accepted a note from somebody they never met that said that you were who you represent yourself to be, and that's how you got your social security number.
Yeah, and actually the funny thing is, after I stayed at that shelter, I asked them, the guy, some random guy that worked there, I said, hey, can you just write that I'm Nathan Rich and that this is my social security number? And he's like, no. I was like, come on. And then I was like, okay. Can you just write that I said that I'm Nathan Rich and that I said that this is my number? And I'm thinking to myself, why would this work? This is the stupidest thing ever. And then he wrote it. He's like, all right, fine, I'll write that. And then he gave that to me.
Christ.
And I dashed down to the Social Security office, and that sweet lady accepted it. And thank God. So then she processed the order, and then I eventually got a Social Security card. And they called I gave my girlfriend's address, my girlfriend's number, all that stuff. And they called her, and then she let me know. And then,
Wow.
Yeah. So then
it proves if you want to do something bad enough, you can make it happen no matter what the circumstances are. Right there. I mean, you just wanted to get that thing and you didn't take no for an answer.
Yeah. I kept going back. It's true. I went back again and again. And
it's wonderful.
So then I ended up with a Social Security card and a birth certificate. And then, of course, I went in New Mexico. They don't have a DMV. It's called the MVD, but same thing basically. So I went to the MVD and turned those into an ID, which was like $5 or something. And so then I had ID, and then I started applying to various jobs around the city. Some of them, at the beginning it was just walk-ins, and then I got a newspaper, and my girlfriend at the time started driving me to places. So in case people were wondering, I applied at McDonald's, I applied at Walgreens, I applied as a dishwasher at Olive Garden, these types of places. All those places turned me down. No callbacks. They were not interested. So, I was not eligible to be a dishwasher at this point. And, they probably weren't wrong. I mean, so yeah, so I was struggling to find anything at all, and I couldn't find a job. So then I had heard of these things called day labor, which is where you're not eligible, you're kind of like me. And so you go, you get up super early, like 3 or 4 in the morning, and you go wait in the dark with a bunch of other people that are just as sort of desperate. And you hope that somebody comes by that needs help, like moving wood or, carrying stuff all day or whatever, some manual labor. So I tried to do that for a few days, but I actually got no jobs because there were a lot of people that already had relationships there. So anyway, I didn't get any work there. So then I thought, I had heard of temp agencies. So I was thinking, oh, maybe a temp agency would hire me. So I applied at 2 of those. Excel Staffing didn't accept me, and then a Deco temp agency did accept me. They said, okay, we'll give you some temp jobs, So then I started working all these temp jobs, still living in a sewer at this point.
Wow.
I started working on these temp jobs as I worked in a traditional Chinese medicine bottling plant where I just stood there all day and squirted this medicine into these little bottles just all day like a robot. I had a job where I rode around with Coca-Cola drivers and basically just helped them move these, Coca-Cola products into Walgreens and wherever. Just little jobs like that really didn't ever lead to anything, but, paid me, I think it was $5.15 an hour. And that was fine by me, I mean, it was really, I was using it as a way to start getting into the rhythm of actually having to show up somewhere and do something. And I just kind of kept my head down. I started avoiding people that I knew and just trying to spend more time with my girlfriend, trying to not do drugs, and even try. I mean, I was still drinking a lot, but trying not to drink to the levels that I was before.
Yeah.
And so then after had been working temp jobs for a while, I basically, I knew somebody that knew somebody at a Wendy's. And so I was able to get a job there, and it was $6 an hour, and they offered me $6.25 if I worked the night shift. So I said, hell yeah, I'll do that. That 25 cents adds up. And to give people a point of reference, at this time when I was working at Wendy's, at night they would throw away the salads, and I had like special permissions by some of the managers that I could keep the salads because I needed to eat the food.
Yeah.
And so I would eat those salads that were thrown away. I mean, this is like where I was at. And that was a horrible job. I was getting yelled at all the time. I spent months there, and like 5 months at Wendy's, which was an eternity for me. I had 11 managers. All of them were women. Some of them were, hated men. And I was just a guy that smelled like a bar, little skinny dude with a mohawk and, tattoos on me, just a little weirdo. And they started kind of a lot of making fun of me and all that kind of stuff. But here's the key point for me was that I knew that every job was going to suck in some way. And I knew that Wendy's wasn't anything special. They have something that isn't good about working there, and everything else is going to have something not good about working there. So I'm just going to get through it.
Right.
I'm just going to suffer through it. And I just kept showing up day after day after day. And my friends would come and make fun of me in the uniform, and I just suffered through that. And you know what I mean? And I just suffered through it. And then after that, I ended up getting a slightly better job. And so I kind of want to pause on the job track and go to sort of how I started avoiding the drugs, because I kind of am just talking about the career aspect of it. So that's really how I started to get into working. Right. But if we kind of go back in time again to when I heard that I should do computers, my mental state at that time was I was already losing track of why I wanted to do drugs so much in the first place. I had been on the streets for so long that I was alive still somehow. And I just wasn't in love with the idea of going all the way down the tubes into just death anymore.
Yeah.
So when I got that idea from this friend of doing computers, the other problem I had was, how do I stop doing drugs, like for real? So every time that I started getting these heroin cravings, what I would do is I would leave the city. And because remember, at that time I was a nomad. I was just hitchhiking everywhere on the street. So leaving the city was no big deal to me. So anytime that I would start fiending or getting sick, they would call it, I would move from Albuquerque to a city that I didn't really know. So I couldn't really get drugs there. It was a lot of extra work to find heroin. I had to wander around, find street kids and everything. Yeah. It just made it more difficult for me. And so I would go, like, for example, I would go from Albuquerque up to Santa Fe, where I don't really know that many people. And then if I started to figure out where to get heroin there, then I'll leave there and I'll go to Flagstaff, wow. Then I would just keep doing that like a nomad. And once I knew that I had been off of heroin long enough to really, kick it, at least temporarily, then I could come back to Albuquerque. And that's when I ended up finding that girl and everything. So, wow. I mean, I could literally write an entire book just on my arc with drugs, which actually I will do. So,
well, you actually found a workable way to get you off it. I mean, as odd as it may seem, it worked. It got you off drugs just by moving away from the source where you could get it easily. That's a hell of a point.
Yeah. And that doesn't work for everybody. But if you're already homeless and you don't have a family and you can move it at the drop of a dime, it's something worth thinking about. Just get away from those people and your hookups.
Yeah.
So there I was, leaving. When I was at Wendy's, this is one of the reasons that I left Wendy's, is I went and I talked to a lady who was working the cash register, and I said, because we're just bored or whatever, and I said, how long you been here? And she said 7 years, and I just Soon as I heard that, I was like, I got to get the fuck out of here. 7 years. And it just motivated me, like, all right, I got to get to the next stop now.
Yeah.
And so then I just slowly built up from there. Then I got a slightly better job. And then I started to think like, okay, this is all great and everything, but how do I do computers? That's what I want to do.
Yeah.
By this point, I still was not able to sustain, pay for everything that I needed. I wasn't sustaining myself. But I had enough money where I could buy, I had clothes, starting to get some basic clothes and starting to contribute a little bit to my girlfriend's rent, that kind of stuff. So slowly bootstrapping off of the streets.
Yeah.
And then I realized, I should go to school. I should learn computers, not just, putz around in fast food restaurants for the rest of my life. So I started researching, like, how do you like go to school? I mean, there must be some way to go to school when you don't have money. And so I found that there was something called a vocational college or a community college, which was, as I understood it, the same thing as the other college, but cheaper. And then, so I went to Albuquerque's Technical Vocational Institute, it was called back then. And I just walked in the door and I was like, hi, basically it was like, hi, I don't have any money, but I want to go to school. What do I do? And they were pretty cool about it. But it turns out that it was a very, very, at the time I remember thinking, extremely complicated and convoluted and confusing process. So all this weird stuff about applications and, student loans and grants and scholarships, and you have to go here and there and deadlines and all this stuff. And it was really overwhelming. So I finally was able to sift through most of that information, and I realized that, okay, I need to do something called a FAFSA, which is an application. That's basically the first major step. And in order to do this application, at this time, by the way, I was 23 years old. Okay, so this would have been 2003, 2005.
Okay.
So I needed, in order to do my application, even if you're over 18, if you're under 24, you need to get your parents' tax information. Now, keep in mind that by this point in 2005, I hadn't spoken to my mother since 1999. So, it was 6 years since she basically, told me not to contact them anymore. So, and I had never met my father. I didn't even know how to spell his name. I wasn't sure if it was Bryan or what. And I didn't even know what he looked like. So I was in another new pickle. Like, how do I get their tax information if I don't know anything about them? So by this time, the internet was starting to come around to where, to where I was and everything. And so I used the internet to search and find out what my mother's telephone number was, and I called her. So this is the first time I talked to her since '99.
Wow.
And I basically, hello, and I basically explained the situation. Said I need to do this application so I can go to school, and I just need your tax information. And she refused. She was like, "No, there's no way I'm giving you that." And I said, "Okay, well, that's fine. What if I just like send you the link online and then you can fill it out and then you can just submit it? So I don't even need to see the information." And she says, no. She was like, she was almost offended by it that I would even ask. I was like getting more and more agitated. Like, why? Like, why can you not just help me go to school? It just doesn't even cost you any money,
Yeah.
And this was really upsetting me. And basically her answer was she didn't want the government knowing how much money she made. And at the time, it sort of made sense. And I just was super pissed off. And I just was like, all right, F you, and hung up the phone. People later in life, when I've told them that story, they often say, wait, doesn't the government already know how much money she makes? Honestly, I didn't even think of that at the time. I was just like, all right, thanks a lot, Mom. So I didn't know what to do. So I ended up just having to wait. I just couldn't go to school. So in the meantime, I wrote an email to her that was really just a nasty email. I'm done with you. just as evil, not evil, but, as hateful as I could be, just, I hope you die alone. You're just a miserable, worthless mother and all that kind of stuff. And I sent it to her. And then in the meantime, I just idled waiting to go to school. And then the next year when I turned 24, I finished the FAFSA without her. And I enrolled in the local community college.
Now, let me ask you a question. I'm going to interrupt you for a second. Is your mother still a Scientologist?
At the time in the story?
Yeah, at that time you asked her to do this for you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, my whole family.
Okay, so now you say you don't know how a person can do that. Yes, I know how. It is the state of mind that the Church of Scientology puts people in. You get in a state of mind where the church is everything, your offspring, your children, your son or your daughter are just spirits occupying a body, and there's no such thing as a familial relationship. It is the state of mind that they put your mother in. And I'm not saying that's okay, but I'm just saying that's how she could do something like that. And I pity you for it, but that was the scene.
Yeah, exactly. And that's just how it was, it's always weird to talk about things in the past because now we all sort of can talk about it collectively and analyze it. But for me at the time, I was just by myself trying to talk to my mom,
It's fucking terrible. At best, it's terrible, at best.
Yeah. And so, so I finally enrolled in this community college. By then I had saved up enough money. I bought a used motorcycle. My friend taught me how to ride it. And I was, starting to come around. I was almost forming, a life now. So this is 2006, right? Almost 7 years after I first started down this homeless path. And I was almost off the streets and, just about off the streets, what I consider off the streets. And 2 months into going to this school, basically I get in a motorcycle accident. It was the other guy's fault completely with many, many witnesses and everything. And I'm, shatter my wrist into many places. My shoulder is torn out. I have to get multiple surgeries, everything like that. So I have to drop out of school. I spend the next about 6 months doing physical therapy to regain use of my hand and everything. I'm just like, oh, I can't believe it. So then my girlfriend says, hey, my girlfriend and I are talking and we kind of go, let's get out of Albuquerque, because at that time I'm popping these pills that they're giving me and, the opiates that they're giving me, the morphine that they're giving me, it's ineffective because I've done so much heroin. So I'm, laying in the couch screaming into the crevice by day and trying to get some sleep at night, but it's really difficult. And so I could just feel in my mind that like heroin was calling to me. And so we had this conversation. I just said, look, let's just get the fuck out of here. Let's go to Seattle, because I liked Seattle when I was, traveling. And she was fine with it because she wasn't from Albuquerque. So we went up to Seattle, and basically once I had use of my arm and everything again, I tried again. I said, okay, let's go to school. I need to go to school. And I searched around, and there was only one school that I could afford, because Seattle, Washington has this thing called non-residence fee, where basically if you're not from the state or you haven't lived there at least 6 months, then you have to pay way more for tuition. So right. I didn't know that. So there was only one community college that didn't do that. So I only had one chance. It was just this one school. So all right, well, that's the school I'm going to. And I went on their website, and they only had one computer-related class called network technician. And I was like, I don't know what that is, but sounds nerdy to me. So I took that. And then when I started the class, it turned out that because this was a extra fee for non-resident school. In other words, because they didn't charge us extra money, there was tons of people in that class who just wanted a visa. So there was basically a bunch of immigrants from all these different countries. It was like Ethiopians and Iranians and Cambodians and all these random people. And so the class was the most diverse class you could possibly have. But the real point for me was a lot of these people didn't want to learn computers. They didn't really care. They just wanted a visa.
Yeah.
And so the class had been that way for a long time. And they didn't really teach you the hardcore stuff about computers. It was really just like, here's what YouTube is. Here's what a CD-ROM drive is, very basic stuff.
Yeah.
And by that time, I had done so much stuff to get into school. The path to getting to school for me was so long and hard. I was like, I'm not accepting this. And so I had a conversation with the teachers there, and they basically said, all right, look, if you do the curriculum, we will give you some projects to do. We want you to build a Linux bind DNS server. And we don't really know what that is, but we want you to figure it out, and we want you to build it. We want you to build a Linux IP cop server. Again, we kind of know what it is. We want you to build it. We'll buy you books. We'll give you servers. We'll give you workstations. As long as you do your curriculum, we want you to build these things for us. So I said, yeah, of course. And then I said, hey, what's like a command line version of Linux? Because I thought, if I'm going to learn this Linux thing, I knew it was like an operating system, I'm going to learn it the right way. I didn't know they're all command line at the time. But so I started with a very difficult version of Linux called Gen 2. And it was at the time even more difficult to install than it is now. And it took me an entire week full time with a handbook, with chat support, an entire week full time just to install this thing up to having a user interface that was usable. So I just gave myself this crash course in Linux and then networking and computers. And so for 9 months of this school, while they were teaching everybody stuff like, basic DOS commands and, whatever, how a CPU basically works and stuff, I was teaching myself networking, Linux, operating systems, servers, and
Wow.
yeah. And during that time is when I started letting my mohawk down. So my huge, red spray painted mohawk started coming down, and I realized that, I was probably going to try to get a job, and having slut tattooed on my, because I was part of this gang called Sluts in the City. So I had slut in the city tattooed on my fingers. So I figured that probably wasn't going to help me get a job anytime soon. So one of the teachers helped me out with one of those programs that remove gang tattoos for free. They cover them up. So I covered them up with what I have now, which are basically, these are little pieces of a CPU schematic. So if you look at like the ink diagram of a CPU, you blow it up and you look at little intersects and say, oh, that tiny little spot, put that on this knuckle. So that's what I did.
Wait, what's a CPU?
The processor in a computer.
Okay.
Yeah.
What does the word stand for?
Sorry?
What does the CPU stand for in words?
Oh, central processing unit.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
That's for my benefit. Okay.
Are you spot checking me?
No, I'm not spot checking. Listen, I am a professional musician. I could teach you music theory and harmony, teach you improvisation. When it comes to computers, a kid in kindergarten can beat me out. I'm digitally challenged. You got to remember that. So I'm doing it for my benefit, or hopefully there's not people out there as dumb as I am on computers, but just I want set
Gotcha.
processing unit.
Yeah. So basically like a very small circuit board that is, blown up, and then I take a little, okay, this wire meets that wire, whatever. And then I just kind of put them on here.
Wow.
And yeah, because I figure, well, if I'm going to do computers, what else can I cover my fingers up with,
Yeah.
And so then the 9 months was up, and they actually, by that time, the school offered for me to work there. And I thought about it, and I said, no, I think I could probably do better than this. I was starting to get some confidence going. So I applied and got a job at a local place that they said, well, you don't really have the experience. You haven't even been to college. But we can tell that because you were able to do these projects in that 9 months, that you're smart and that you're good with computers. You can grow into this position. So we'll hire you. And so I got this job doing, I won't bore everybody with all the details, but very advanced Linux stuff, recompiling kernels and building drivers and qualifying financial institutes hardware with different versions of the OS and programming, all this stuff that was at the time for me very advanced. So I got a job doing that outside of Seattle. And this is really around the time that I consider that I was no longer homeless, because now I was able to support myself. I had an actual job. I had been through school. I was paying bills. I didn't need to be on the streets anymore. And this is 2006, late 2006 at the end. And so that's kind of how I got off of the streets. So then after that, I split up with my girlfriend, and I thought, you know, Seattle's not really where I'm from. I kind of want to go back to LA and like reconnect with who I am, because I feel like I was taken away from LA when I was, you know, 8 years old.
Yeah.
So I went back down to LA and I got another job, and, you know, it's the same type of situation. I go in for the interview and they take a look at my knuckles and they're like, is that like, what is that? And I tell them, oh, it's pieces of CPU. And they're like, really? You know, because these are tech jobs. Like, wow, that's awesome, dude.
I know. Yeah. It's a brilliant idea.
Yeah. I mean, I wish I could say it was totally deliberate, but it just worked out well. And
necessity, there's an old saying, necessity is the mother of invention.
Yes, exactly.
That makes sense.
Yeah, it does. So I had the same, you know, thing. They said, well, you don't really have enough experience, but because you've done this and this, and, you know, same exact, almost mirrored the first interview. And then they offered me more than I had even asked for at this new job. So I was totally stoked. And this position was a managed web hosting company, basically doing the systems and network administration, and then eventually the systems architecture. So what that means in non-nerd languages, designing platforms that companies use for their websites. And so these, you know, were companies like Verizon and Gatorade and Miss Universe, Miss USA, Miss Teen USA, skateboard.com, snowboard.com, the Grammys, the Oscars. So all these big, you know, sites, many sites. And I basically cut my teeth at this job for about 2.5 years or so. Almost 3 years. And that was extremely heavy exposure to all nerd IT stuff. Basically, almost any technology that any nerd knows, I was exposed to and probably got pretty good with there. And in some areas, I was becoming expert level. So then I left that job, and I just quite randomly took a Craigslist job, which was a systems administrator at a visual effects company in LA. And a visual effects company they're the people that do CG for major motion pictures. You know, they add in the monsters basically.
That's computer generated graphics. Is that what you call it?
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. So there's a whole industry of companies that literally just add in, you know, basically they modify your film to have the models and animation and assets and all that stuff in them that we see on the screen as like a dinosaur or whatever.
Right.
And so I didn't know anything about that industry. I literally just took a job. I mean, it might as well. I think the other one I was looking at was an ice cream plant. So it's like either visual effects or there was an ice cream company that had some tech position. So I really didn't care. So I got a job there, and from the tech chops that I had by that time, going to this new type of company was very simple. To, you know, from my point of view, it was a non-tech company, non-technical. So it was just all their problems were really basic to me, and I did extremely well in that area, and did things like, you know, we rebuilt an entire facility in Santa Monica for them, and were able to move the entire facility without any downtime. Or maybe like four hours of downtime, something like that, which is unheard of. And so then basically what happened is one of the producers from that company and a supervisor from another big company, they headhunted me. They poached me. They basically said, hey, man, we've seen what you're doing here and we're impressed. And we're doing a startup company in Utah and we want you. And they said, what's it going to take? And at that time, I was in Santa Monica, had, my multiple monitors, and I would kind of lift my head above the monitors and I could see the ocean. I mean, it's right in front of me. So I was like, there's no way, dude, this is a pretty, cush spot. And then I thought, well, what's it going to hurt? So I just sent them an email. I was like, well, if you wanted me to move to Utah and quit this job immediately, this is what it would take. I want this much money. I want a month off, a year. I want to work entirely from home. No one's my boss. I make all the decisions. I have equity in the company. I just named everything. And the response was, okay, we'll write it up.
Unbelievable.
And so, yeah, I was, by that time, I was already what I would consider to be expert level in some areas of IT. And they had seen it. So sure enough, I moved to Utah to be part of the startup company that they had. And their company involved doing, it was a bunch of research that I did for them and everything. Revolved around remote access to visual effects environments and stuff. And so their company, after about a year, started to fail. And one of their last ditch efforts to kind of save it was they had come across some Chinese investor. And this investor was telling them, hey, let's do, I have a visual effects company in China. Maybe we can do this merger. And so they sent me out to China to see if it was technically possible. Like, what's the reality of this? So I flew out to China and basically fell in love with the entire experience, fell in love with the country and the people and the food and the language. And I just was like blown away. And after a couple, after a month or two, they ended up closing up shop. The merger didn't happen. And I just said, I'm staying in China. And then I traveled around Asia for a couple years. And so now this is about, early mid 2014 that we're at now. After these couple of years of traveling, I went to many countries. And at that time I worked remotely from the same web hosting company in LA. So I was working at night and traveling during the day. And then I just was thinking, I gotta get some stability in my life. It's just too much. I've been traveling for 2 years, no friends. I'm going to those random countries and everything. So in 2014, I was living in Chiang Mai, Thailand, and I was thinking, I want to learn Chinese, or I want to work with Chinese people so that I can kind of, see what they're really like to work with.
Yeah.
And so I tried both streams at the same time. I started looking for Mandarin schools and looking for any job that I could do that I would be good at. I wanted to choose a job that I didn't have to learn anything because I already knew how to do it. And so for me, that meant IT, even better would be IT within visual effects. So I had heard of a company called Base FX in Beijing, which was the largest Asian-based visual effects company. So I just sent them an email. So here's my, credentials. What do you guys think? And they immediately were like, yeah, come up to Beijing. Let's interview you. And so in mid 2014, I went up to Beijing and interviewed with them. Everything went well. And I started at the company in late 2014. I started as, a hopeful to take over the IT manager position because there was already the VP of technology was running it.
Right.
Within a few months, I became the IT manager, and then I got promoted later to the IT director. And then after some time, I got promoted again to the chief technology officer, which is the highest technical position. It's executive level. And so that position was managing a little under 100 technical staff in 6 cities, in 3 countries, in 2 languages. So every single 100% of all technical decisions of the company ran through me. And we had, Malaysia office, a Los Angeles office, and then, Beijing office, an office in a place called Xiamen, an office in a place called Wuxi outside of Shanghai, an office in Dachang. So I had to manage in English and, my broken Chinese. So we're talking about major motion pictures. We did Star Wars Episode 7, Episode 8, Rogue One, all that kind of stuff, all the, Jurassic World and you name it. So I have a very long, IMDb now. And I was doing that for quite a while. I had originally only planned to just work there just to, get in touch with Chinese people and how they work and experience that. I was expecting to spend about a year, but I ended up spending about 4 years there. I quit last month, and we could talk a little bit about why I quit here in a second. But while I was, go ahead.
I was going to say, what was the year that the guy mentioned to you? Did you think about computers?
That must have been.
You were living in a tunnel.
Yeah, that must have been 2005, 2004, 2005 in there.
And up to 2014, you worked your butt off and you kept your intention strong to come out of it, and you end up being one of the top executives in the Chinese company. My friend, I'm going to tell you, that is a hell of a success story. You know that?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know what the hell that was. Did you hear it?
Yeah, I heard it. Somebody was Skype calling somebody.
Oh boy. Okay. Well, there you go. But Nate, I got to tell you, it's a success story and a half. It's unbelievable. You're talking about a guy living in a goddamn tunnel, a street person. Now you're a top executive in one of the top computer generated graphic companies in China.
Yeah, it's the biggest one in Asia. So
to boot, you could afford to quit.
Yeah. So exactly. I mean, I'm going to get to I think a summary that's gonna talk about that too. But I want to explain what happened with my mother. So while I was in LA in working at that company, I got a call that basically said that my mother was sick, and that was from my aunt. She called and just somehow knew how to get in touch with me magically, and said that my mother was sick, and they weren't sure if she was going to make it. And then they wouldn't tell me what hospital she was at, so they basically just said, "Oh, I think she'll be fine then." And then they called me a couple days later and said, "Oh, she passed away." And then they had a funeral. They said they were gonna, tell me about the funeral. And then the next time that they called, they said, "Oh, we already had the funeral. Yeah, it was just some friends and family. And we'll send you your some pictures and stuff that she had." And so they sent me out a box of stuff that my mother had within her in her stuff somewhere. And so in my book, I have some actual notes and letters that I wrote to my mother that I scanned, and I have a lot of papers and schoolwork and stuff like that. But my mother did pass away in 2010, so she's gone. And I met my father once, which I also talk about in my book. But so I just wanted to mention that. I don't want to go too far into it, but that's what happened with my mom. And my father was never there in any way. And my mother's whole side of her family was all Scientologists, and they disowned me and disconnected from me and disconnected from the other side of my family. So, as far as kind of the way that it turned out, I mentioned this in another interview, is that this, I don't know if you can see it, but this bump right here on my head, this is from a time when I was on the streets that somebody hit me in the head with a weight bar. Like, it's basically like a rebar, solid metal pipe. They hit me in the head with that. I have overdosed to the point of basically being dead while somebody was breathing for me. My friend Spit, one of my close, street kid friends, he died literally right next to me, leg to leg on a couch. And I've been to jail several times. I've been, in fights. I've been arrested. I've been down and out. I've done lots of crack, coke, meth, LSD. I've done mushrooms. I've done GHB. I've done ecstasy, salvia, mescaline. I mean, you name it. I've done a lot of stuff. I've had a lot of experiences, let's say. Slept in dumpsters and I've been jumped. I've had a lot of things happen to me in my life. I've spent a lot of my life where no one on this planet cared at all that I even existed. And I've seen the people around me become so bitter from those things. And I went from that position of having none of the luxuries of a normal person, and having nothing and living in that sewer, to slowly fighting up to the position that I'm at now. And it's 2018, October 23rd, my time, when we're recording this. And right now, I've written this book. And like you said, I resigned from my position at Base FX. And, I was a CTO there, and I just live in Asia and pretty much do whatever I want now. I mean, I'm not rich, but I can afford to pursue the things that I want to do. I want to write this book. I want to write some more. I want to do some videos. I want to do interviews like this. I want to get messages out that are related to my story, specifically the messages of, number one, you can get through whatever it is that you think is a big problem in your life. Number two, you don't have to be like other people. I can't tell you how many times I've been, sitting around drinking with a bunch of street kids and heard how cemented into their ways that they are, how bitter they are, how reactive they've become in the way that they think about life, and thought to myself, yeah, I don't want to do that. I just don't want to be that person. And, that you can get through it. And then the third and most important thing for me is the family connections that you have, the connections even just with people. You're going to die, and that person's going to die. Your people die, and then it's over forever. And if you are going to let something get in between you and somebody that you love, you got to be sure that it's important enough so that after they're dead, you're going to carry that around with you, and you're okay with that. Because the last thing that I told my mother was this big, long email telling her how much I hated her and everything. And then she passed away. And that's just a cross that I have to bear forever. So I think that people hopefully can learn from my story. I think that there's sadness in it. There's inspiration in it. And, at the end of the day, it's not a perfect ending because I'm still quite a damaged person, but I definitely have made it in ways that I've cared to make it. And that makes it a lot better. I live with a couple cats. I got a nice apartment. I've got a wonderful girlfriend, and some people out there are caring about my story, and feels good. And all of this has been worth it just to hear the few people that have messaged me privately and told me stuff like, you know what, I haven't gotten along with my father or my mother, and it's been years and we never talk. And you know what, after I found out about your story, I started to talk to them again, and we're never going to be best friends, but we have some communication now, and thank you for that. When I hear that, everything that I'm doing just is worth it.
Well, I'm going to tell you something, Rich. Nathan, I'm not going to add anything to that.